Okay, this is going to sound wild and a little controversial. So I have to start off with a whole series of disclaimers. So number one, I don't think Alexander Technique has anything explicit to say about your medication level. So Alexander Technique, in my understanding, is a way of learning to move the way the body likes to move. It's a way of locating unnecessary tension in your body and learning to release it. So I'm coming up at the end of a 3-year Alexander Technique teacher training program, so that's where I'm coming from. So even though Alexander Technique doesn't say anything directly about whether or not you should meditate, whether or not you should medicate, I've found that Alexander Technique has had a profound effect on my whole being, my mind, my body, and my emotions. So here's my story on how Alexander Technique helped me to get off medication. Your mileage may vary. I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you what to do with your meds. This is what happened with me. So I was basically bedridden for nearly 6 years by chronic fatigue syndrome from 1988 to 1994. And in the fall of 1993, I got a doctor who put me on Nardil, N-A-R-D-I-L. And that dramatically improved my health to the point where I was able to lead about 2/3 of a normal life, which is kind of what I've had since 1994. So I was on Nardil for about 6 years, and then I started seeing a homeopathic doctor who wanted me to go off it. I was a little concerned, but I went off it without ill effect. And I remained off psychiatric medication for about another 18 months. Then in late 2001, a psychiatrist started me on the medications of clonidine and Klonopin. So clonidine is often used to treat high blood pressure, ADHD, and anxiety panic disorder. And then Klonopin is often used for treatment of panic disorder as well. So I guess I was under a lot of stress. I'm a controversial blogger. I'm always getting myself into trouble with the things I say in these videos and the things I write on my blogs. So here's what was going on when I was prescribed these medications. Since I started blogging for a living in 1997, I've had a largely solitary life during the week. Blogging tends to be a solitary activity. Writing tends to isolate you from the wider world. So then on Shabbat, when I'd get to mix with people and be social, I'd often get high from the socializing, and I'd end up getting giddy and acting and speaking inappropriately because I just felt so happy about the opportunity to mix, particularly with attractive young women. I remember at a shul singles lunch in 2002, I said some inappropriate things to women, and people complained. When I relayed this to my psychiatrist, he suggested that I try out a low dose of lithium carbonate. So according to Wikipedia, a number of chemical salts of lithium are used medically as a mood-stabilizing drug. So I've had others talk about lithium as the gold standard in mood-stabilizing drugs, particularly in the treatment of bipolar disorder. So my shrink did not say I was bipolar. He said I had some tendencies in that direction. I absolutely agreed with him. And I was eager to try anything that would enhance my life. So let's say, I don't know how you make a diagnosis of bipolar, but let's just say there are 11 questions, and if you answer yes to 8 or more of them, then you're diagnosed as bipolar. And let's say I probably answered yes to 5. So I have some significant tendencies in the direction of being bipolar. So over the next 8 years, from 2001 to 2009, I really came to love and respect lithium because it kind of evened me out. No longer had as many of the giddy highs where I'd act and speak as though there were no consequences for my choices. And I didn't have as many of the crushing lows where I felt like there was no hope for my life. On the downside, lithium bloated me. I gained about 20 pounds, my face became puffy, and my girlfriends could smell it in my pores. So lithium slowed my reactions. I noticed myself drooling at times, my speech was slower, was less distinct, my thinking was slower. Life in general slowed down for me, and in most ways this seemed like a good thing. So I was making my living as a blogger, and I was constantly launching attacks, reporting the news, but it felt like attacks for people, and reacting to attacks on me. So I've largely lived my life in reaction to my upbringing, to people who had power over me, and in reaction to my insecurities and fears. So living in reaction sucks. Living in response is just fine. Living in response means that you've considered the stimulus and you've chosen how to respond. Reaction, by contrast, is unthinking, it's automatic, and it's a form of slavery. So in 2007 I started getting acupuncture, at first for my sore elbows, but soon I came to embrace this oriental wisdom for many of my ills. As my life improved, I noticed my acupuncturist started asking me regularly if I was still taking my medication. I could tell she wanted me to quit it, but she felt legally constrained from saying so. So I did not quit my meds. Then I entered an Alexander Technique teacher training program in January 2009. This is daily 3-hour-a-day training in the Alexander Technique. And over the next couple of months, I slowly quit my meds one by one. I did some consulting with my doctors on this. I also talked to one Alexander teacher, but I did not run the whole thing by them as in, oh, with Alexander Technique I don't need these meds anymore. But I just tell my doctor, I feel like going off the clonopam. Now, how much do I need to cut it down? Now, from my anecdotal sense of things, I think there are very few people in Alexander Technique teacher programs, at least by their second and third year, who are still on these psychotropic medications. And very few Alexander teachers that I'm aware of take any kind of medication for mood disorder or depression. So I felt fine about my choices because I knew that a new prescription was just a phone call away. I told myself that if I ever went back to the dramatic highs and lows that ruled my life prior to Alexander Technique teacher training, I'd go back on my meds. Now, many of my Alexander Technique teachers would be appalled by this post because they would not find anything saying, oh, do Alexander Technique, you don't have to take your meds, which is not what I'm saying. I'm just sharing my story. And, we're not Scientologists. We're not saying psychiatry is bad. Now, I think a minority of Alexander teachers would perhaps applaud this video because while they believe that some people, of course, should stay on their medication, if you can live a good life without medication and you find that Alexander Technique helps you to regulate your moods and your depression, maybe thin your depression and thin the dramatic highs and lows of your mood disorder, then perhaps you can live a good life without medication. Your mileage may vary. Consult your doctors. So meds like the ones I was on tend to slow your reactions and your thinking, and your kinesthetic responses are more fuzzy. So with Alexander Technique I learned how to slow my own reactions so I could make better choices in everything from how I moved to how I spoke and what I said. So I think Alexander Technique is all about your response to fear and how to let go of the unnecessary compression that inevitably accompanies that fight or flight feeling. With the technique, you learn to inhibit your habitual reactions so that you can choose a more beneficial response to stimuli. So as I move around life, I get to know a lot of people who are on multiple medications for depression and mood disorders. And all of them have this really messed up head-neck-back relationship. I think they could greatly benefit from Alexander Technique lessons. I suspect that immersion in an Alexander Technique teacher training course where you're there every day for 3 hours help most of the people I know reduce or eliminate their psychotropic medication, that as a result they would feel better and they would think more clearly. I remember I had a girlfriend who was on 5 of these medications at once. She claimed that all sorts of places gave her panic attacks, such as hospitals or law courts. I remember saying to her one evening, you don't need to have these panic attacks. If you learn to free your neck, to think up, get Alexander Technique lessons, they would most likely diminish and even go away completely. I remember she got really mad at me and said, well, if Alexander Technique is so great, how come you lose your erections when I'm on top? So even with the blessed technique, I still have my highs and lows, as you can tell if you read my website. But my highs and lows these days have more tranquil quality. These habitual tendencies to go up and down are getting thinner and lighter. So when I choose to self-destruct on the internet these days, I feel like I'm making a choice rather than just reacting by habit to some threat to my freedom.